60 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. My favorite TikTok video, it's just commentary via TikTok of the last week or so, has been from this Cuban gentleman in response to the Black Lives Matter Marxists in this country.
Directly to Black Lives Matter movement. You guys suck. You know why? You know why you guys suck? Because any of you guys live in the communist country, in the socialist country. The day you guys go to Cuba and live for a month, at least, then you guys can talk about Cuba. Then you guys can talk about Cubans. Cuba is not a paradise. Cuba is not like a pretty island. It's not. Cuba is a dictatorship country. Cuba is a dictatorship government. People are protesting right now in Cuba. They're not protesting because they want the embargo to be off. No. They're protesting because they want to be free. They're protesting in Cuba because they want a freedom.
And they're protesting other places around the world for the same reasons. A lot of anti-government protests, not just Cuba, South Africa, Haiti, Belarus, Myanmar. By the way, in response to the protesting in Cuba, in addition to the lethargic response from the Biden administration, you had this response from perhaps somebody more influential in Democrat socialist circles than the President of the United States, Nicole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project and Howard University. The most equal multiracial country in our hemisphere, it would be Cuba. That's largely due to socialism, which I'm sure no one wants to hear. The most equal multiracial country in our hemisphere, it would be Cuba, and that's due to socialism. Sure is equal in their misery. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the counterterrorism coordinator on President Reagan's NSC staff. He's now the CEO of Fidelis Publishing and Fidelis Media, and his new book, written with David Getch, is We Didn't Fight for Socialism, America's Veterans Speak Up, which was just released yesterday. Lieutenant Colonel North, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Dan, great to be with you again. I was listening to your news report about all the gunfire in Chicago. I think there's probably more gunfire in Chicago than there is in Afghanistan.
Yeah, in Baghdad. Yep, you're right.
Well,
17 shot just last night in 3 separate shootings and 1 killed.
It's incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Well, yeah,
and it's a Wednesday.
It's the big blue city, defund the police, don't prosecute the criminals model. It's working out famously in Chicago and New York and L.A. and Seattle and Portland and Minneapolis and so on, as you know. But in terms of this really dovetails nicely into the larger conversation about the grand vision that the Democrat socialists have for this country, and what we're seeing playing out in other countries that should be instructive, the way Venezuela should have been instructive as well. But Nicole Hannah-Jones saying Cuba is the most equal multiracial country in our hemisphere.
She's out of it. The bottom line of what's happening in Cuba is that the people of Cuba, the young people, the inheritors of this great socialist revolution, which at least the leadership in the past had some degree of charisma. You know, Fidel Castro got all kinds of people to back him up. And when the Soviet Empire collapsed, they turned to others. And I will give you a prediction. The current regime is going to turn to China as they looking desperately for some financing to carry out their socialist dreams. The bottom line of what we did in this book was to take the opinions of those with whom we'd served. David and I are both Marines. We've stayed in touch with all kinds of those with whom we served. And what they're now seeing, particularly the guys that are older like I am, they're seeing that this country is basically split in two. It's very close one way or the other between the socialist agenda and the freedom agenda of the founders of this country with the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And what we've seen is decades of progressive indoctrination, like the quote you just read. In the institutions of the so-called mainstream media, socialist advocates have finally hoodwinked half the American electorate into believing their false promises, which is why in the aftermath of the November 3rd election, they came back to us and said things like, what you expect that we really fought for socialism to protect it, to advance it? And as you point out, they've seen it all over the planet Earth. They've seen it in Eastern Europe. They've seen it in places like Myanmar. They've seen it all over the Middle East, sub-Saharan Africa, and obviously Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, which, by the way, have the largest numbers of refugees getting into the United States, both by the southern border, which, think about this. If you're a Cuban refugee and you get in a boat and put your life at risk and try to make 90 miles in a leaky boat, and the Coast Guard catches you, they're going to send you back to Cuba. Okay? That's this Biden administration. At least he could go to the Bill Clinton measure of saying, if feet dry, then you can come in. You know when that stopped? It stopped just minutes before Barack Obama left office. I mean, that policy of sending people back. So what the administration ought to be doing is they ought to find a way to get the big tech companies to sit down and figure out how to turn on the internet there. And you ought to call a big powwow, call a summit of them, call other countries, like get the Canadians and I'm just wondering, did it come up in the conversations with Merkel?
Oh yeah. Well, I'm curious what you think Reagan would have done were he president in this time, and you see that spontaneous revolt going on in Cuba. As somebody who was very concerned, as you well know, with the threat of communist infiltration in our hemisphere.
Well, look, Ronald Reagan, liberated 804 medical students on the island of Grenada, which was defended the revolution that had just occurred in Grenada, because they murdered the prime minister, who wasn't certainly not a pro-American, but nonetheless they murdered him, and he sent in the Marines and the Rangers. And in 19 days, it was all over, and the country went back to being a democracy. Ronald Reagan would have done that same kind of thing, not necessarily with U.S. troops, but let's say, for example, Radio Marti can no longer be heard because it's being jammed. Mm-hmm. You can solve that very simply. If you're listening, Mr. Biden, here's what you ought to do. Launch 4 aerostats up over Gitmo and broadcast loudly the encouragement to this revolution that's occurring within the revolution. That's the kind of thing we ought to be doing, and we're not.
Do you think there's any possibility that there's any more civil unrest in Cuba, that the Russians would come in and try and maintain order?
No. Look at
or take over.
No, here's the one thing about Putin. Putin is now advertising he's got a hypersonic weapon. He's got all these other things. He is governing a dying country. Demographically, Russia cannot reproduce. You need 2.1 live births per couple to keep steady state. The birth rate in Russia is below 1.5. He is governing a country. The Chinese aren't going to have to invade Russia to get Siberia. They're buying it. And the bottom line of it is, no matter what Putin says, his country that he is governing, average lifespan is less than 54 years for a male. The productivity of the people is at rock bottom. The last time he tried a reproductive holiday, everybody went out and bought a lot of vodka and a lot of cigarettes, and they're still dying at the same rate, and they're not reproducing. The same thing happens in every one of these dictatorships. And what the long-term prospect, if the United States can just hold to being a republic, a constitutional republic, we're going to do okay.
Yeah, it's if
we're reproducing.
I notice you say the word "if" we can hold to being a constitutional republic. I mean, Dan Henninger writes in the Wall Street Journal of the left. They know it's this year or never for making central government authority the virtually irreversible locus of power in the U.S. system. The clock is ticking. I'm not so sure it's this year or never, but they certainly have a full court press on for this year. I mean, what's your general assessment of sort of the general threat assessment of the left and that proposition you just put forward, maintaining a constitutional republic?
Dan Henninger and I would agree, Dan. The bottom line is I don't know when But I've got a good idea that the most important election of my lifetime, and I was born when Franklin Roosevelt was president, the most important election of my lifetime is going to come in November 2022. We have one last chance for we the people to stand up and do what's right. And if we don't replace this Congress and gain a majority of conservative constitutional protectors, like the guys that I served with, the guys we write about in this book, if we don't find enough of those people to turn out and vote, I got 18 grandkids, for crying out loud. They've got no future at all. These guys are trying to spend us into oblivion, and that kind of temperature in this country, where we promise everything is free college, free medicine, free everything, that's totally damaging to those 18 grandkids of mine. They'll never be able to pay off the debt. And so let's start with passing the right kind of infrastructure bill first, and then hope and pray that we can do the right thing in November of 2022.
Well, so this book that you wrote with fellow Marine David Goach, We Didn't Fight for Socialism, America's Veterans Speak Up. What do you and your co-author and American veterans have to say about the state of the senior leadership of the U.S. military, starting with General Milley?
Well, General Milley is just flat wrong. General Milley describes how he read Marx, he read Che Guevara, so did we. But we did it, A, voluntarily, because we wanted to know what our enemy was thinking. And he then says the same thing about this book, that he wants people to learn about critical race theory. He wants us to learn how bad. This book is not about our enemy. This book is our enemy. This book is about people who want this country to be torn down. It's not being read to find out our enemy's mindset. Our enemy's mindset is, this is a bad country. I am a white person, therefore I am an oppressor. Everybody with darker skin than me is the oppressed, and we're going to make victims out of all of them. That's outrageous. I'm not a racist because of the color of my skin. I'm not part of a system of white elitism. And what this is Marxism converted to modern times. Karl Marx would write about the idea of a capitalist society being evil, right? Capitalism was the divider. Today, the divider is race. And all it is they just take out the words capitalist and take out the false economies, and you've got what they're trying to do to America, is polarize this country, take this country apart. They're using the 4 Ds of socialism. They want to deceive us, distort us, divide us, and destroy us. Nothing has changed except the terms that they're using. They're using those words to communicate what I call semantic subterfuge. It's an idea or technique that was promulgated by the Confucius Institutes at major U.S. universities. Their job was to collect intelligence and spread PRC propaganda to deceive and distort using soft-sounding words for dangerous concepts. So all socialist ideologues, they call abortion a choice. Riots are called demonstrations and protests. Christians or conservative beliefs are called racist, and working hard and smart to succeed is called a white privilege. That's just garbage. And yet he wants us to learn about how bad we are. I find that to be despicable.
The book is We Didn't Fight for Socialism, America's Veterans Speak Up. He's Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, the counterterrorism coordinator for President Reagan's NSC staff, now the CEO of Fidelis Publishing and Fidelis Media. His co-author, also Marine David Goach. Lieutenant Colonel North, thanks so much for joining us again, and good luck with the book.
Great to be with you, brother. Dan, Amy, thank you very much. Semper Fi.
Yep, thank you so much. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You've made the switch, and it feels so good. You've switched to Chicago's Morning Answer.